In previous episodes, we already covered Georgian sword fighting traditions. Now we will discuss short and medium length cutting and thrusting weapons. Here we start. Khanjali, also known as Satevari, is known for Georgian from ancient times, and its shape has not changed too much. Old timers still can remember training systems and exercises. There were times when every family or every region had their specific school and signature moves. But due to the multiple invasions and hardships Georgia went through, most of the systems got lost. After 10 years of research, we were able to recover only 10 different types of schools and systems mostly tied to the different regions of Georgia. They combine systems like Khanjalian hat, Khanjalian stick fighting, or Khanjali in both hands. Also, techniques like blindfolded fighting or Svanetian behind the back hidden Khanjali fighting systems, Khanjali spinning systems, etc. In today's program, we will introduce only few of them. But until we cover this topic, I also want to briefly go over Khanjali types, which are mostly prominent in Caucasus region, specific to different tribes and peoples. Khanjali, depending on their fuller count, fuller type, metal type, or blacksmith marks, was known differently in different Caucasus regions. There are Kist, Dagestani, Legish, and Georgian Khanjals. Northern Caucasus Khanjals have more narrow body and acute tip, which had a very practical function to penetrate or break links in chainmail. Kist Khanjals, for example, were known for their asymmetric fullers. In cross-section, fullers were mismatched. Overall, in Caucasus mountain regions, there emerged multiple professions for Khanjal, but only practical ones were adopted. From the other hand, Georgian type Khanjals are prominent with their symmetric three fullers, which are joined in conical shape near to the tip. Tip, however, is less acute. Also, scabbards are covered in rich floral ornaments, but handles are practical and modest, with medallion or two medallions on the scales. But every Khanjali has its designation, and depending for what it was designed, it could have different characteristics. Sometimes owner gave preference to air quench instead of water quenching. Water quenched Khanjals were sharper but fragile during the sword fight. This sword was made in northern Caucasus per blacksmithing mark. These type of Khanjals were popular in Kisteti, Dagestani, and Chechnya. Air-quenched Khanjals could be sharpened, but under immense stress it could deform but not break, leaving owner with bent but still functional blade. Such a deformation was not thought as a critical failure, but rather as a positive feature, as an advantage over the enemy fighter. Three different Khanjals, one for parade, one for funerals, and one for fighting. By end of 19th century, there were very well-known swordsmiths in Georgia, such as Elis Barashvili brothers, Jikias, Pipias, Zaganias, and others. Swords we show here are fine representative of that era, and you can see yourself how refined and stylish these swords were and the level of swordsmithing and goldsmithing. It will be hard to cover all type of Khanjals in one program. In this short review, we scratch the surface of the theme. We can talk hours about the Khanjals of that era. So now we will cover fencing schools and traditions regarding swordsmanship and techniques. It is fair to start discussion from western part of Georgia. It is worth mentioning that in this region, There are still alive few sword fighting traditions, fighting techniques of one-handed, two-handed, and blindfolded fights. We find more intriguing blindfolded fighting techniques called Hinkiria, shown in these movies from early 70s. Hinkiria, or blindfolded fight, usually was held in front of elders or other public. This was done to guarantee for following rules and keep fighting honest. In Megralia, there still are preserved training moves and systems for these kind of duels, footwork and other physical and psychological exercises. Blindfolded trainings sharpen all senses of the fighter. It develops brilliant feeling and understanding of distance and space. Blindfolded fighting requires brilliance in both hand to hand and hand to sword techniques. This kind of blindfolded exercises and training system was very common in whole territory of Georgia. For example, in Hefsoreti region, these blindfolded training systems were mandatory program from the early childhood. Hinteria is interesting because its training methods are preserved and we can see how it implements playing in training for the children. And it was meant for kids to develop all the needed qualities, later to become elite fighters. All of us can remember childhood games. Games like blindfolded hide and seek, and other specific games which had hidden meaning to it. For example, when one kid is blindfolded and others are running and out clapping, and blindfolded kid must catch at least one of kids. These games train were in place for teaching certain qualities, such as silent movements, movement while blindfolded, hearing while blindfolded, explosive movements. It was complicated by binding one or two extremities to the body and adding wooden swords or sticks to the game to make balance better or emulate fighting without hand or foot. After learning new technique, children were expected to test them on the blindfolded fights. Accents were made on correct technique and coordinations, footwork, good avoiding technique, and good countering techniques. Training complex contains almost every scenario or setup in which a real fighter could end up. There are even techniques which are designated for bare-handed fighting against armed attacker. This technique was taught with wooden swords, but later, when mastered, wooden swords were replaced with the real ones. In order to be prepared not only physically, also psychologically. All other kind of fighting disciplines in Mingralia were taught this way. First was learned with wooden swords, and once masters, wooden swords were exchanged to the real ones. However, sharp sword training was taking place in slow motion. We will cover other schools of Mingrelian martial arts in different episodes.
საერთოდ უნდა აღინიშნოს, რომ ყველა სახის ვარჯიშები, რაც ხის იარაღით ისწავლება შეგირდების დაოსტატების შემდგომ საბრძოლოდ იცვლება. ასეთი ტიპის ვარჯიშები თავისთავად უკვე ძალიან კარგი შესამზადებელი ბაზაა არა მარტო ხინტკირიასათვის, არამედ ხანჯლაობის სხვა სკოლებისთვისაც სამეგრელოში, რომლებზეც შემდგომ გადაცემებში გვექნება საუბარი.
Kyria is overly complex and mysterious fighting system. In order to master it, it was thought that one needs not only superb physical and psychological fitness, but also something more. Something that we call sixth sense these days. We will not make any comment about this, but of course, in ancient times it was thought that every system has its mysterious secrets, and it was well kept. What we will point out, however, is that physiologically, fighter in a blind state is not able to process 88% of the incoming information, which renders him almost defenseless. Inexperienced fighter, when even pointing their sword's tip towards the opponent, can control only half of the attacking zone. It means that if opponent is more experienced in such kind of duels, he will attack below the waistline. This way, he will deal not only vast damage to the opponent, but also will have good chances to get away without harm to himself. Because of this, it was common tactics from the beginning of the match to move as little as possible in order to generate any noise and give clue to the opponent. Body and the center of the weight should be lower, near to the ground, to be safe from unsuspected enemies' blows in upper quarter of attacking zone. Create decoy noises with the feet or swords in order to provoke enemy's movement, which will give up his location and compromise his defense. Immediate retreat is in order after successful attack on enemy in order to avoid afterblow. Even blindfolded, deadly wounded opponent can still deliver some devastating blows. In order to prevail in such kind of duels, fighters had to train for extensive periods of time, from early childhood. This was all for today's episode, but we want to assure you that in next episodes we will cover other schools of the Khanjali fighting, such as Svanetian and Hefsur schools. Goodbye. End of 6th episode. Disclaimer: this translation is not part of the original series. Translation might mildly alter from the original Georgian texts. This video is designated for small group of people who are interested in Georgian martial arts. This video is only for educational purposes.